Show that all commission members are here except for Commissioner Keller. The changes to the agenda.
Chair, there are no changes.
Okay. Takes us to item 4, public comment. Anyone may address the Water Commission for up to 2 minutes, any subject that's not on our current agenda. Do we have anyone who wishes to speak under public comment? Not seeing or hearing any. Takes us to consent calendar. We have the meeting minutes, approval of the minutes of March 15th, 2018. And item B, the Integrated Regional Water Management Memorandum of Understanding. I actually had a question on item B before we have a motion, and that just simply is there a public participation process schedule, and where did the Water Commission fit within that?
I'll have Dakota Corey come up and answer this question.
That's a good question, Commissioner Davis. There was actually a public meeting last week.
All right.
Thursday evening, regarding the integrated regional water management plan and the plan update. That isn't on. Sorry about that.
When it rings, you know that they're after you.
Moving forward, the plan will go out for public review prior to being adopted.
And will it come, staff, do you know, is it going to come back through here for any comment on its way to council?
We can bring it back. I don't know that we had talked too much about the game plan for it. I don't know that we have any big projects to put on the list, and I think that's what we're looking at right now, if we have any that fit the criteria.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you want to report back on that?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, we have a consent calendar of the meeting minutes and the Integrated Regional Water Management
I'll move
MOU.
approval of A and B.
Okay. I have a motion to approve the consent calendar
I'll second.
with a second. Any questions, comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, consent calendar is approved. Thank you. Takes us to item 6A under administrative items, changes to the water main replacement program goals and funding.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I'm Kathy Taylor. I'm the Water System Manager for the city, and I'm here with Matt Ward. He's the Water Distribution Superintendent, and we are presenting an item that we will be taking to Council on May 15th. And the recommendation for that item is that Council increase the 1% replacement goal for the city's annual water main replacement program to a replacement goal of 2%, or approximately 6 miles of the water system on an annual average basis. And to help with the discussion, I would like to pass out, it was a study that just came across my inbox, and it's from the Utah State University. This is just the executive summary. The entire report is 50 pages, and I can pass that along if anyone's interested. And the title is Water Main Break Rates in the United States and Canada, a Comprehensive Study. So I think one's for you.
Oh, thanks.
You start us.
Yep. Another one coming down your way.
Where are we? Sorry, I'm struggling to get my presentation up here.
You don't?
Yeah.
Hit escape.
Oh, it's over on the farther left. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So our presentation is entitled Water Main Program Replacement Goals. And an overview of the presentation will be the main replacement program policy and funding, water system assets, water main installation history, water main break historical data, options for replacement rates, and the recommendation. So this is a pie graph of the city's water distribution system asset replacement costs. And as you can see, the water mains make up 73% of the distribution system's assets. So it's by far our largest asset. And as for the water main material, our water mains are made up of a variety of material, with the majority being of cast iron pipes, or 44%, followed by PVC at 26%, and ductile iron at 19%, and then the rest are smaller miscellaneous materials.
Kathy, when you replace one of those today, what's the best type of replacement up there, or does it depend upon the diameter?
Well, it depends on the location.
Or location,
It's
okay.
primarily it's going to be a PVC or it's going to be a ductile iron if it's on a high pressure or the soils are rocky areas.
So the PVC slice up there is just inherently better than some of the others that are up there, obviously than the cast iron, but also the better. The PVC's like non-degradable, kind of longer lifetime.
And it's a newer material. If you look, historically, what I'm showing up now is the water main installation dates. And we've been putting water mains in the ground since the 1800s. In fact, our oldest water main in the ground today that's in service. It was put in 1893. And so at that point, PVC was not available, and primarily, cast iron was being installed at that point. And I've boxed in in the red box there is when most of our water mains were installed. It was post World War II, from about 1948 to 1978, when the majority of the system was installed. And cast iron water mains are our greatest concerns. 135 miles of the system, or 44% of the system total, are made of cast iron. And cast iron pipe has 5% more breaks per mile than all other pipe materials combined in our system. And nationwide, the average lifespan for cast iron water mains is 79 years. However, the city's cast iron mains, the average service age currently in the system is 77 years. So we're pushing the lifespan of our cast iron mains. This graph is the main break history going back for 10 years. It's on a 12-month running total. So the moral of this graph is that we're on an upward trend with our breaks. The main replacement program policy and funding currently, Council's goals is to replace 1% of the water mains per year, which is about 3 miles. This was established in the late 80s. I think it was about 1986, actually. I actually called Bendy White to ask him, and he looked through his documents, and he agreed. The typical capital water main program budget is $4.7 million, and our operations budgets is estimated about $1 million plus for emergency repairs and maintenance. Unfortunately, emergency repairs do not address replacement needs. So even though we're repairing a section of water main, that main itself is at risk for future breaks and resulting water outages. What happens with emergency water main repairs, it's an unplanned shutdown. It's disruptive to our customers, especially businesses and medical care facilities. Just last week, we had a transmission leak on a large main. It was like 22-inch diameter up on State Street between Lacumba and Hope, and it was, in the area we have a lot of hotels. There was a lot of restaurants, and there's also a dialysis center. In total, I think we had 702 customers, and we were going to put them out of water on an emergency, under emergency. And our crews worked with our sensitive water customers up there to limit the shutdown from, I think it was 1:30 in the morning to 4:30 in the morning. And we also had a contractor who was had worked with us overnight, and it's not a good business plan. I am proud to say that, to my knowledge, we received only one customer comment, and it was actually a compliment. The gentleman had gotten up in the middle of the night, didn't have water, called our emergency services line, and they explained what was going on, and then he got up at 6 in the morning and he was back in service. So that's it's a statement of our dedicated staff, but again, that's not ideal. Additionally, with the emergency repairs, we pay a premium for emergency response. Materials, contract labor, overtime for staff, and costly property damage claims as well. A few years ago, we had a water main break. I'm sure if you remember at Caltrans, where we actually closed the freeway for a period of time, and currently we have a claim from Caltrans of $804,000. I'm not sure we're not paying that necessarily, but that is their initial claim. And we also have private property claims that we have to address along with these emergency repairs. And what is our response to these increased main breaks? As staff, we've increased funding for the annual water operating budget for emergency response. As I mentioned, it was approximately $1 million. Well, last year, we also increased the funding goals in the adopted 6-year CIP for the annual water main replacement program. This is our adopted 6-year CIP. So these are our goals. It's not all funded right now. The first 2 years are funded, but these are our goals. As you can see, the highlighted annual water main replacement program. Our first 2 years are just at the $4.7 million funding level. And then in 2021, we've bumped it up another 0.5%, followed by the last 3 years of we actually doubled the funding. Because as staff, we're forecasting with, during the drought, we actually delayed some of our water main replacements. But we're also seeing this uptick in main breaks, and we know that we have a problem and we need to address it. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Mr. Ward.
Thank you, Chairman, Commissioners, and pleasure to be here. And I'm going to touch on some of the points here regarding our asset management strategy. Back in, I believe it was 2011, early 2011, we did a phase 1 of our asset management study, and that focused on our reservoirs and pump stations, realizing that we had a real issue with our water mains. We went ahead and moved forward with a smaller scope of work for how we wanted to deal with these water main breaks. Even though we were in drought, we still wanted to continue to study the problem and work towards a long-term solution. So on December 9th in 2014, Council awarded a contract to Brown Caldwell for water main assessment. The purpose was to evaluate the percentage and prioritization of pipes per year for replacement based on conditions, break history, and expected useful life. Also to provide recommendations to optimize the water main replacement program. Their scope included a pipeline risk assessment and to begin programmatically updating our GIS water main information, so to take a look at the data we had and to clean it up a little bit, and also use a pipe risk tool developed by the Water Research Foundation at Colorado State to identify high-risk pipes and to make an attempt to be surgical in our replacements. We also were delivered a replacement planning model that we've began to use and did initial calibration on, and that model is a database that's going to help us prioritize replacement needs and forecast costs ongoing. The pipeline risk assessment tool used GIS to analyze individual pipe segments, identified pipes at highest risk of failure. The risk is defined by the likelihood of failure and the consequence of failure. The likelihood of failure is determined by break history, pipe age, and material. Consequence of failure includes social aspects or social impacts to schools, business, hospitals, and traffic. Those are weighted into that tool and important for an asset management program. And they also weighted the model using the volume of water conveyed by pipes. So the larger pipes, of course, were weighted higher. The replacement planning model assists with understanding and communicating future replacement and refurbishment needs over 30 years. That's generally the forecast that we look at. Additionally, it provides input on meeting R&R needs for running funding scenarios and considering debt ratios. The results of running the RPM model for the water mains. Trends indicate the city will experience increased main breaks based on aging water mains. It's not a surprise, but we did look into that, and 52% of our water mains should be replaced in the next 20 years, and that's an important thing to consider. The model suggests that we should replace water mains at 2.6% for the next 20 years annually. For the next 20 years, so that's a significant increase, which would require about $12.2 million for annual water main replacements.
Okay, with the that was what the model reported, but staff wanted to take into consideration other concerns such as budgets, required staffing levels to produce such levels of work, other capital program needs, and construction impacts on the community. How much construction can the community sustain at one time. So we looked at alternative water main replacement rates. So this is the results of the model compared to various other replacement rates. So the big green blob is our unfunded water mains that need replacing that is coming up. The 52% that needs of the system that needs to be replaced within the next 20 years, and then the lines are replacement rates. So the yellow at 1% that's the status quo of what we're doing. So as you can see, everything above the yellow line, the green area, that's being unaddressed. Whereas the 2.6 will jump up to the third line. That's what the model is saying. If we did 2.6% every year, we would address all of the needs. And the 3.0 is up there. It was just another data point. And then doubling the program at 2%, which is what staff is going to be recommending, basically addresses the majority of the needs. We'll still have some emergencies out there, but we think that would best address the situation. So going over the options. Option one, which was that yellow line, was to replace the 1% of the water mains annually, which is our status quo. Under the status quo, there'd be no need for additional capital funding, and we would basically be running more water mains to failure. Unfortunately, the deferral of water main replacements is also going to increase our emergency response, which is a very inefficient way of doing business. This increases water outages and increases water repair costs. There's greater disruption to the community and local economy, and increased property damage and resulting claims. Option two, which was what the model suggested with the 2.6 or 7.8 miles of water mains being replaced every year. Again, it's a significant impact to the budget. It was the increased staffing needs. We would continue to defer to other needed capital improvement work, but however, it would reduce our emergency response, but there'd be increased construction impacts to the community. And option three, which is what staff is recommending, is to double our current program or the goal and replace 2% or 6 miles of the water mains annually. And this would address the need to accelerate the water main replacements. It would smooth future budget increase. It would we think it's an achievable workload. We would probably be hiring more consultant assistants. It would also help reduce emergencies, water outages, and potential liabilities. And as for the capital funding, as I showed earlier, the adopted 6-year capital improvement program anticipates increasing the water main replacement program to 1.5% replacement rate by 2021 and to 2% in 2022, 2023, and 2024. So what we're suggesting at this point is accelerating the increase to 2% to do it in the next fiscal year. And the water fund right now, as for funding, and you'll hear this in the next presentation, we'll be recognizing additional one-time revenues. We have savings recognized from a delayed startup of the desal plant. Recently, we had an award of a $10 million desal plant grant. And we've also seen water sales coming up from being increased in the Tier 2 and Tier 3. So our revenues are currently up. And before I read the recommendation, I just want to touch on the article that I passed out to you. A couple of the highlights is that they're saying that nationwide, we're not alone. Our system is not unique. This infrastructure problem is nationwide. Number 15 of the article, the bullet point is the average age of failing water mains is approximately 50 years old. Our program was based on a 100-year replacement program, but the average failure is 50. I guess the good news is the national pipe replacement rate under item 18 is 125 years. So we're ahead of the nation, but still we are behind. So because of the data and the trends that we're seeing, that we are recommending that council increase the 1% replacement goal for the city's annual water main replacement program to a replacement goal of 2%, or approximately 6 miles of the water system on an average annual basis. So with that, I will take your questions.
Good. Questions from the commission? Michael?
Just have I think just a couple, and then I'll wait for comments. I have a lot of comments. The number that you throw in there for that $10 million grant isn't some. It's a you're referencing in the staff report a combination of anticipated annual water revenue increases of 3 to 4%. Those water revenue increases have occurred, right? Are they referencing now, the ones we have in hand?
The ones that have been approved by council and will be taking place over the next few years.
So you only need $5 million for your staff recommendation, give or take. And so you're referencing both those increases and the $10 million grant. You wouldn't have to pull much from that $10 million grant, would you? You wouldn't be.
Yeah, we're not. We're the next presentation will dive into that. But yes, we're not anticipating to use all of it. It's just
is that. I don't even know if I'm supposed to mention this, but is that number really $10 million, or is it not $10 million because of potential discussions with Montecito Water District?
Even with the discussions with Montecito, the $10 million is our discretion to utilize. We may have to. That may change how much they reimburse us over the next 20 years.
Or we share with them from that $10 million.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then my other unanswerable question I'll toss at you guys is to get to the 2.6, so another increase of 6%, and to meet what the plan says over the next 20 years would add what to a water bill?
Oh, God, you got all my questions.
What we'd be talking about is another $4 million, which would roughly be an 8% increase.
$2.5 million. So $5 million for 1%, $5 million for 2%, and then half of that again, right?
We're talking about taking the main program from the
2% to 2.6.
right.
So you referenced $4.7 million in the current budget for 1%. I'm calling it $5 million to double that to 2%, and then half of the $5 million is 2.5 to get to 0.5 or 0.6%.
I guess I'm thinking the 12.
And
I'm
for
thinking
some reason, does it accelerate quicker in that last 0.5%?
that 12. Well, and then the 12 million that was put out there.
That was just basic math. The 2.6, for going from the 1% to a 2.6% is 12.2%. But then to doubling it, we had I think a number of 8.7, I believe. That's what
Basics math it must be off.
Right.
So.
Could you go back to the budget slide real quick? That might be helpful.
So you referenced current budget is $4.7 million for 1%. I just double that. I'm calling that 10 million. And then I need a half of either one of those 1%, the 1% or the 1% to get to 0.6 or 0.5%.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
So let's just say, so my number would be, so let's just say it's 2.5 million. Mm-hmm. And my unanswerable question, I'm sure, is if we agreed to burden the ratepayers with getting to a point where we cover the entire wave picture of 2.6% over the next 20 years, what does that do to a water bill?
We're talking probably about a 5% increase in revenue. When I say revenue separate from rates, because it all depends on how that impacts the rates, but it's a 5% increase in revenue.
So I guess what I would have liked to have seen is that alternative to say, well, that might be politically possible to push for, that might not be. And
so one of the factors that we did look at it, and I think it's something as we go along and ramp up to 2%, I think we can talk about the 2.6. One of our concerns internally is the logistics of getting to 2% and doing that much work.
Get that.
That's so. I mean, right now what we're actually thinking about is doing 2 water main projects a year, because awarding a project for $8 million plus to one local contractor is a lot of work for one local contractor. So we're looking at maybe even doing 2 $4 million plus contracts each year to try to spread out the workload. But then that means staff keeping up with that. So I think part of our recommendation of 2 is really an incremental approach to see how we are going to manage it. Right now we think we've got a handle on how we do 2%, but going to 2.6 is really pushing it because we want to knock that work out in a year, and we don't want it to linger on. And
So you're dragging me into my comments, so I'll wait on that and let everybody else ask their questions.
okay.
Thanks.
Commissioner Jordan, additionally, if you look at the unfunded needs, the green blob, that was based on average lifespan. So some of the pipes are actually going to live longer. Like as I said, we have one pipe in the ground since 1893. It has not really showed us problems. So we
I
think
get that, but I guess you can focus on the green blob, or you can focus on the asset management report, or
Right.
I mean, it's just like you can pick and choose. And you've mentioned a couple times in the report averages, and averages are skewed by a high and a low. That's not really a
Correct.
median. So,
Right.
so it's like if you have a pipe that for some reason is outliving its useful life by decades, that's skewing everything higher, and vice versa. If you had a really good one that failed really early, that's skewing it lower. So
absolutely
yeah.
good point.
It's a point worth nothing, but it's a good
Well,
point. Right? I
but
understand.
modeling is one point, and then we felt that we had to put a reality check on the other implications. That's how we came up with the suggestion to double it.
But I think you bring up a great point, and something we I think talked about in our last presentation is the pipe that went in the 50s. It's not holding up like other pipe, and that's been kind of a challenge. There were, I think, cutting of corners in the 50s. I think on how much iron was used in the pipe. The wall thickness was changed, and it was across the board. We're not the only ones seeing this, but we certainly have pipes that were put in the 20s that we're finding working better than pipes that were put in the 50s, and they have a vastly different wall thickness. Mr. Ward can kind of speak to his experience with that, but that's been what's challenging. We've actually, even with the RPM model, are actually prioritizing pipe that was put in the 50s over stuff that's in the 20s just because of that factor. And so there's several different elements to that. You're right, ours kind of skewing that. We have pipe that aren't even meeting some of the what we consider basic lifespans, and then of course pipes in the 20s that are exceeding that.
Other questions? Comments? Megan?
Yeah. Can you go back a couple more slides where it's the yellow lined, the budget's
Oh.
highlighted in yellow? I just want to make sure I'm fully getting
okay.
this. So, yeah, that was it. So we're talking about essentially doubling the budget 2019, 2020, and then a 50% increase in 2021?
Yes.
That's what we're talking about.
Correct.
For this statement.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
But we're asking council to increase their goal. So beyond 2024, the goal would be established to be 2%.
Continue, yeah.
Right. Okay. And so, okay, that makes sense. And I know we've talked about this a long time, and during the drought, we put this on hold because of cost implications. So I appreciate the background. And water main breaks are not a popular thing for anyone in terms of cost and impacts, and also water loss. So appreciate the time you guys spent on this, and think it's probably time that we start moving forward with these things.
Great, good. Other questions? Kristen?
Yeah, thank you. So when I first read this, I wondered if the 2% was fast enough, and I just want to clarify. I mean, you're going from a 100-year replacement rate to 45-year replacement rate, going to 2%. Is that
It would be, yeah.
okay? And but what I'm understanding is that it's more workload, and then how much the city will bear in terms of construction around town. That's also a factor. Okay. And then for the risk calculation, consequences of failure, likelihood of failure, how much is this being coordinated with roads that we're fixing, and when you're saying 2 water mains per year, is that just purely based on the risk, or is it also coordinated with we're also repaving or reworking a road?
That is a fantastic question, and in the prior years, it's been pretty easy to coordinate with streets because they didn't have any money and weren't doing any street pavement work. Certainly, with the infusion of money they have now to start actually maintaining the streets, it is going to be something that we're coordinating. And what's great about the RPM model is it allows us to say, what are the pipes we need to do for the next 5 years? Certainly, there's going to be those conflicts of pipes that, for whatever reason, are outliers, and we have to accelerate them. But the kind of the point here is that we can turn over to the streets department and say, here's where we're going to be for the next 5 years based on our understanding of these pipes. And so to the best we can, at least try to get in there, replace those pipes before the street gets resurfaced and repaved. So, but it's going to be challenged. They're hoping to touch every street in the city at least every 7 years or 5 years, and then we have this much longer long-term replacement model. I also want to say that this 2% goal we do see as being in the long game temporary to address this pig in the pipe. This big expansion of the city's water distribution system that happened back in the 50s, and then eventually going back to something probably around 1%, maybe even less, and that being kind of the trend that will take us forward again. This isn't something that we see having to replace our pipes every 50 years. That we don't think that is necessarily something that we have to commit to for the next 100 years. That's not what we're saying here too.
Great. Thank you for answering my next question.
Can I follow up to that for the pig in the pipe? Would a 2.6 be better proposed for a shorter period of time? Would that be?
We had talked about that. One of the things that we were kicking around was even an SRF loan, going out and getting a loan for $75 million and just coming in and knocking out a lot of these pipes and at least reducing that emergency threat. Because I think the challenge is even once we get this accelerated program, we're going to continue to have those emergencies for the foreseeable future. We hope, though, in 10 years we'd start to see a big drop in that, but we will still have that emergency response. But we felt like we probably could not handle that in the community. It would just be so disruptive, and it would really challenge not only our private contractors who are installing it, but our city staff to keep up with them. And so we kind of backed it down. And I really appreciate the comments today, because I think what we're obviously going to do is we'll see if we get this 2% going and see if we can maintain that, and then see if we have the additional capacity, and if there's an opportunity to move it up to what the model is projecting, we can talk about that. But I think for now, I'm going to bite off more than I think we can chew. I think 2% is going to be a pretty accelerated target. Currently, with our staff, we're doing about 1%, and it takes an entire year to knock out that 1%. So we're basically needing to double that and looking to how we can leverage the private sector to help us support that without having to grow city staff on that.
I can make a few comments to the questions I've been hearing too. So with our asset management strategy, that strategy takes well over a decade to develop. We've got all this underground infrastructure and we've got as-built drawings, but we're using our staff to gather that information. We've also got an ongoing drought, which has been a huge variable for us to deal with. We do have working groups within Public Works with our engineers, and we're looking at trying to be as surgical and effective as possible with our water main replacement prioritization. And then we're also working with our engineering group and streets to make sure that we're trying to align the programs as close as possible. And so we feel like we've got some good overlap that we're going to be able to target, and it's going to be an ongoing work in progress.
Great. Thank you. Other questions? Mike?
Yeah, so you did kind of touch on this, Joshua, about the 2%. Maybe at some point we taper down on that. Is there like a timeline on it for now, or is it just 2% for the foreseeable future until we get to a point where we might taper back?
The 2.6 was 20 years, so 2%, would probably be somewhere in line with that time frame. But we're going to continue to analyze the breaks and the need for replacement ongoing. It's part of our water main program.
Yeah. Yeah, can you go back to that slide with the chart on it?
The chart.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make the point, like, if we do the 2% like we're showing, all that stuff that's above the green line, 20, 30 years down the road is going to actually be underneath that red line.
Right.
If we're accelerating it now. So I don't necessarily see the need to go any higher than 2%. I think that's a good target. I like the direction that we're going with this. I think we talked about this, I think, in one of the previous meetings, too, is that if we try to knock it all out right now, then in 75, 100 years, we're going to be hit with this same problem again. Mm-hmm. So I think kind of staggering the the work and kind of spreading it out and making it more of an annual thing makes more sense. So that's my 2 cents.
And I think to that degree, there was urbanization during that time between the 50s and the 80s and 90s, and that won't happen again, knock on wood, in that regard. And so that what Mike's saying is exactly how it will play out on the other side. Okay.
The other thing I want to add, because you may see this out there too, is the no-dig trenchless technologies that are out there. We have experimented with some, and we have some stuff in the ground that we're keeping an eye on and watching to see how it performs. Technology has a long ways to go to mature. Unfortunately, it's not as applicable as it is in the sewer, which has really changed significantly the cost structure for rehab in our sewer system. But we're keeping an eye on it, and we'll continue to follow that technology. Who knows, in 10 years, there may be a mature product that we actually can apply that significantly brings down the costs and allows us to do more for less and less inconvenience to our customers. But right now, we haven't seen a product out there that's mature enough to really do this, but we are keeping an eye out for that.
Great. Okay. Anyone from the public wish to speak on this item? Okay, we're looking for a recommendation to recommend to council increase in the water main replacement goal from 1% to 2%.
I'll move recommendation.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second.
I have a couple comments,
Okay, Mr. Jordan.
as usual. So on the staff report on page 2, about halfway down, in that middle paragraph, you throw in the phrase that the 2% will adequately accelerate the replacements. And I get that. There's all kinds of mischief in the word adequate. So, and I would never accuse any council members of not reading between the lines on this too, but it's clear to me that what's inferred there and not stated is it's not going to address the deficiency or gap of almost 25% of what we know we need to replace over the next 20 years. So that would be a suggestion to include, and at your benefit or peril politically on what that does to your staff report. But I think that's a clear point that needs to be made. We get that you're there's no way I'm not going to support this because we've lobbied for this enthusiastically. But I think it really needs to be pointed out we're still leaving that 6% on the table as an issue, and it's unfunded. And then the next paragraph down too, where it's where you've made a determination on what would be a level that's tolerated by the community. This is, of course, tolerated until it happens in front of my house, right? And so, right? So.
He's looking at me because it happened in front of my house.
We're actually replacing it in front of my house in the next 2 weeks. So I'm looking forward to it,
So toleration is good until it happens to you, and I get what you're trying to say there about that, but I know how that can quickly change. And the example I would use on what's happening in town right now is the Edison work, okay? And that wasn't our work, but it was the equivalent type of work under the streets, and that one quickly changed too when nobody could tolerate it, and all of a sudden all the work's getting done at once rather than over 20 years or whatever the heck they had planned for that time. And then slide 20 is really frustrating, and that's where you mention that we just don't have the capability to do what we know needs to be done, and that's just frustrating. So we know we're leaving. You've actually made the point that it'll be a stretch to double to 2%, and we know we're leaving the other 6% on the table, lingering out there, and we don't even think we can do the work that we know needs to be done. And that, and you've heard me talk about this before, that continues to kick the can down the road on work that we know needs to be done, and it frames what people expect on the price of water. My expectations of what work needs to be done, what it's going to cost to do it, and I'm not having to pay for that right now, even though it's a present need. And it's just frustrating. You've heard me talk about this before on all ranges of water fees that we still are not charging for what the true cost of water is, and this is just another example to me. And I will keep bringing that up, so if we can have this conversation again on how we get to 2%, 2.6% in future years or higher, that would be of interest to me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Can I ask a question? Just go back to the bubble diagram. I heard Mike Kilborn say something, which that's what I took it to be. If you actually go to the 2%, you address the bubble, quote unquote, that the 2% touches. You move that to the left into the earlier years. You flatten out the bubble, and the 2% gets you there. You don't need the 2%.
Maybe not.
The 0.6%.
Because those numbers are still based on averages, which are skewed high or low, which are skewed into better metal or less metal.
You know, again, regardless, over a 20-some year period, it's going to flatten that bubble, and the 2% basically is getting you where you're at least projecting you would be in sync.
Yeah, if you projected this out
wrong?
farther, you'd see a significant difference in that green bubble. It'd
Right.
go way down.
Right. No, I get that.
Yeah.
So-
So I'm just making the. I was also at the 2.6%. How do we get to the points? To the max. But then when I actually looked at and thought about that, I thought, no. In fact, the 2% is addressing the bubble in flattening out that curve. So
And I get what you're saying. It addresses the bubble, and it addresses it on paper for a decision made today. But every one of those years after the first two columns are an unknown as to what's going to happen with the budget. So you can say to 2038 will do what you're saying it's doing, but you have no assurance after this decision that affects this particular dollar value that the next council in 2 years is going to set up the same relationship for those numbers. So there's moving parts there that would affect that.
There always are.
Yep.
But in fact, if you look just from the 1% to the 2% in the first 10 years, you capture a large part of the gap. Okay, within the foreseeable future. Anyway, there is a motion with a second on the table. Any other questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, item 6B, proposed changes to the fiscal year 2019 water fund budget. Joshua, Malcolm? Good morning.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, Liaison Sneddon, Malcolm Hamilton, Administrative Analyst in the Water Resources Division. Today I'll be going over our proposed FY19 operating and capital budgets for FY19. So quickly I'll go over our budget adoption timeline. Some of you may be familiar with this, our projected FY18 results, and then we'll look at a couple components of FY19. The revenue and expenses, service fees, and our staffing levels, ultimately how this all boils down to our projected reserves, and then really kind of the meat of this will be our proposed FY19 capital program, which one part of it you just heard about is increasing, and some other projects we're adding as well. Today there will be a recommendation. It's coming straight from the Water Commission to Council to adopt the budget. There is not a council report that correlates to this presentation. We'll be doing departmental presentations. I'll discuss that. So right now, FY19 is what we consider a mid-cycle budget. In June of 2017, we developed a 2-year plan. We did FY18 adopted and then FY19 planned. Typically, a 2-year budget cycle attempts to minimize workload impacts, so you avoid major changes in your second year. That would be FY19. And you tend towards a status quo budget. When I'm saying status quo budget, what I mean there is that, of course, as it's described, there's minimal changes in your expenses if possible. However, there are some adjustments made for salary and benefit costs by our finance department. If you have turnover, if you have people reaching new step levels in their pay, then they'll adjust for those automatically. I should note that for some programs and departments, they may really be on a 2-year cycle. I think with the drought for the water division, it's felt like an annual budget cycle. Additionally, we've been doing annual rate studies and rate changes, which is a workload impact. We're seeing maybe a tiny bit of normalcy right now. We adopted rates last year for 3 years for FY18, 19, and 20. We're not making changes to those, so it was nice to have that not on the workload when we're developing the budget. So quickly, here's the timeline we've been going through. Going back to December and all the way through February, we were asked to develop our revenue and expenditure projections. We package those together in memos, and we review them with our department heads and the city administrator in March and April. In April, typically they're filing the recommended budget. Just a couple days ago, they did file at city council. In May, we'll be going individually, each department presenting to city council. So Public Works is on Monday, May 21st at 2 p.m. If you'd like to watch or come in, you can see us, and we'll go through each of our divisions and highlight some of our budget themes going into FY19. And then ultimately in June, you're going to see a budget adoption, typically in the mid to late June time. So I just want to quickly touch on our FY18 year-end projections. These definitely inform some of our decisions going into FY19. So what you're seeing is revenues are projected to exceed our budget by about $4.1 million. The large majority of that is coming from higher than expected water sales. I believe Ms. Taylor had touched on that in her presentation. We've seen some increasing consumption in tiers 2 and 3. And just to make a point, when I'm saying increasing consumption, my reference point is actually going to be the rate model. So I'm not reaching back maybe last year, and otherwise it's just I'm thinking about how that compares to what the rate model. So we're just slightly above that, and we're seeing a bump there. We also had some budget reimbursements from our COME and CCRB budget payments. And then on the expense side, we're seeing about $6.1 million in operating savings in FY18. And again, there's one large component to this. That's going to be the desal facility. When we have a delay in construction, there's two impacts. One initially is operational savings from our contractual payments to operate the facility. But two, as the project gets pushed back, we are drawing less on our loan, so we're paying less in interest, and additionally we're pushing our principal payments back for debt service, so you have this compounding effect. And I believe that was somewhere in the neighborhood of about $3.2 million. Then additionally we had some other somewhat large cost-saving items, and that totaled up to about $6 million. So there's a lot of words on this slide, but I'll go through them quickly. Looking at the FY19 recommended budget, we were kind of guided by these bullet points here. One is we're experiencing operational cost savings, and mostly from the desal, and we've been seeing higher than expected revenues in recent years, and higher than expected revenues when compared to our model. Those two together are adding to our reserves. Something that was kind of hanging over our head in the last several months, and it was nice to see it come to fruition, is we were awarded a $10 million grant. That came into play. It was always on our radar, but now it's a reality. That will also go to our reserves. And so when you combine those first two bullet points, what we're getting is what we really see as a one-time surplus of reserves. Those now are available to allocate or appropriate to capital projects and capital maintenance that's been deferred. And then a couple other points is that we're not seeing a lot of change in our non-rate revenues. So our service fees are pretty much on track to meet budget. We're not making many changes in FY19, and we have some small adjustments to our operating budget. But what you'll see is we have a one-time surplus of reserves, and Joshua and staff will be talking about what capital projects we've deferred that we can now tackle. So now I'm going to turn and look quickly at the revenues for our FY19 recommended budget. Really what you're seeing here is only one real change, and that's in our water sales. Water sales is equivalent to our rate revenue, so that's our fixed monthly charges and our volumetric charges. What we've done here is that although we're seeing increasing consumption in these tiers 2 and 3 for FY18, I feel that there is definitely some uncertainty, and we are still in a drought. So what we've done is held our consumption projection constant, and we've only increased our revenue what would be increased by the rate impacts. So the 1.87 million there in that right-hand column is reflective of just almost purely rate impacts. We're not assuming any further rebounds in consumption. Found that to be conservative and also reasonable as we're still in this, like I said, uncertain time. In the staff report, I think it did mention, but if you're a single-family residence using moderate use, about 10 HCF per month, you'll see your bill go up monthly about $1.50, I think $1.47 exactly. And that equates to maybe about a 1.2% increase in your monthly bill. So if you remember in our rate adoption, we were actually able to drop a lot of our volumetric rates and hold those constant. They don't change for 3 years. A few of our rate classes are going up, like commercial just a little bit, and irrigation, recreation class, but most of them are held constant. So a lot of the increase, what you're seeing is a 5 to 6% increase in the fixed monthly charge, but that would be about it. And then quickly looking at expenses, like I had said, if you focus on that right-hand column, if you're looking at increases or decreases from our status quo, there's not a lot of change there. We do have one small special project for a water quality study that's increasing that item by about $150,000. But the large portion here are transfers, and in this transfer line item is our capital transfer. So what you're seeing here is a snapshot of our operating budget, and we transfer out to fund our other funds. So for instance, we transfer to our capital projects fund to fund those projects, or we transfer out to our drought fund for drought expenses. But that $6.3 million increase is due to our recommended increase in capital project funding. It's slightly offset by some revenues we're taking in now in the capital program, but that is almost solely due to capital projects. I'll touch on our fees and staffing quickly. We have service fees, our non-rate revenue. They're structured to maintain full cost recovery. In FY17, we had done a fairly extensive review of all our costs, materials and time and staff level. And now we, in the last 2 years, have been doing across the board 3% increases to keep up with inflation. We're recommending that again for FY19. If you do see that document, they should be most all of them 3% increases. We have, for a few of our items, we specifically recosted them because we knew that materials or the staff level got outside of 3%. Other than that, we have no proposed changes to our staffing levels. And so a lot of those effects for our FY19 picture boils down to our reserves and our ability to fund capital projects. In FY18, and it's not all due to FY18, we had some positive operational results in FY16 and 17, but culminating in 18, we believe we'll have approximately $23 million in reserves above council policy. So those are spendable reserves available to be allocated to capital projects. In FY19, we had in the model and in our budget intended already to use some of our reserves. With that increase in capital project funding and a slight offset from our increased water sales revenue, we are recommending the use of $8.5 million in reserves in FY19. Also, I should note, because it was fairly recent, and this follows along with the budget document out in the public, I have not yet added in the $10 million DSAL grant award. But of course, when we receive that $10 million, it's a fairly simple calculation. You add $10 million to the available reserves, 18 or 19, wherever you place that. And so ultimately in FY19, we believe without the $10 million grant, we'll have about $14 million in reserves, spendable reserves for capital projects. Now, there's a lot going on here, and you saw a portion of this. Let me just kind of delineate two sides. Up top, what you see listed first is our adopted capital program, our status quo capital program for FY19. Those are kind of our bread and butter capital projects. The very first line, and a water main replacement program, you're pretty familiar with now. Ms. Taylor had just presented on this. You'll notice we've already put it in the budget. It's a $4 million increase. And then here at the bottom, I've highlighted in that box all the new capital projects that we intend to fund with this one-time surplus of reserves. At this point, I'm just going to turn it over to Mr. Hagbark, and he'll go through some of these new projects and what they're intended for.
Some of these projects you can call new. A lot of them I think we've been talking about over the years, and rightfully so because of the drought. We have been pushing them off for various, mostly financial reasons, but also staffing reasons. And there's certainly things that I wanted to revisit, and I believe they're important to move forward with. One, of course, is the advanced metering infrastructure. We did do a business case on this. Again, this is going to basically smart meters that people can basically go online and see what their water usage is. You don't have to wait till the end of the month. There'll be regular information available. Also with this technology, the ability to let customers know when water usage is unusual. So instead of waiting 30 days and getting this outrageous bill, you potentially could be notified within 24 hours that your water usage seems unusual, and at least give you an opportunity to correct it. So a technology that I think is still maturing, but there's a lot of stuff out there now, and I believe it's a good time to start jumping in on. And so with this, taking $500,000 and starting to pilot some of these different technologies, we had honed in on 2 specific technologies before, but taking a look at that industry again, and then developing an RFP to try and move forward with a large-scale project. So this is, I think, something we want to do, and I think it's something that we have the capacity to at least get moving on. Alameda Pipeline Project. So the Alameda well, located in the Alice Keck Park area, pumps right into the distribution system with just chlorine treatment. The challenge with the groundwater in that area is it's high in iron and manganese, which don't have a health concern, but it does lead to discolored water and other just visual concerns by the public. And so wanting to tie that pipeline in to the Ortega groundwater treatment plant, which will allow us to remove the iron and manganese and reduce then the need to flush the system more frequently in that area, as well as the water quality complaints that we get. Water supply optimization studies. So this is to look at how we can treat some of the challenging water in Gibraltar, given all of our different sources of supply. We feel like we've made some significant investments at Cater to treat challenging water with desal now, and how is it that we can really optimize Cater's operations and make the best so that we can treat even more difficult water in Gibraltar, which we'll talk about more during the drought update, but how we can make better use of that water as we continue to deal with a challenging watershed. Desal conveyance pipeline. This is an item that is going to council on May 1st. This is part of the negotiations with Montecito on the water supply agreement. That item, under our roles and responsibilities, goes to council. But this would be funding our portion of that conveyance pipeline. We've agreed to split the cost of design. So this is our portion, and we do believe that there is a water quality benefit to city customers, not to mention the benefit if we can reach an agreement to offset and share some of the costs associated with our regional desal facility. Hydroelectric tunnel modifications. So when we completed the hydro facility a few years ago, we actually had last year was its first full year of operations. It was fantastic. we completely offset all the city's electrical needs at Cater. It was really impressive how much power we were able to generate from the facility. But one of the challenges we had is hydraulically in the conveyance system that comes out of Mission Tunnel and then enters into the pipeline. We were finding issues with air getting entrained, and that would basically act like almost like a blockage in the pipe. And then we were having issues with that. And so this project would be to go in and basically put in some type of air relief valve so that we can get air out of the pipe, and you won't have that kind of backup. Again, something that we'd like to do. It really optimizes our ability to operate the hydroelectric facility, but again, was prioritizing it as we had other concerns. And then, of course, water system infrastructure plan, similar to what wastewater did. This would be going through and looking at our distribution system, which to my knowledge we have not done, and going through and doing a complete look at what is needed and what kind of investments we need to do in the future. Capacity, as I think I've mentioned in the past, a lot of our reservoirs were built to hold a lot of water, and we're now in the mode of water quality, which is turning over that water frequently, and so a different approach to operating the system. And so as we go in and replace these reservoirs, what size do they really need to be? Because we have quite a few reservoirs that do need replacement. And so helping us with that planning, and again, the resiliency component, making sure that we have backups. We knew we have some transmission mains that need some attention. And so this comprehensive document would give us a 25 to 30-year outlook on what we need to be doing with our water system going forward. And that brings us to our recommendation, which is that Water Commissions recommend the budget onto Council for 2019 with the proposed operating and capital budget as presented today.
Great. Thank you very much for the presentation. Questions from the commission? Everybody jump in at once. Krista?
I should know this, but what is the policy for how much of the reserve you can keep above the recommended amount? Are you allowed to keep adding to the reserve and not spending it all the way down, or how is that? What is the policy?
So, Councilmember Sneddon, we are required to keep a reserve, and if we look back, it's somewhere in the $17 to $18 million range. It is a product of a formula that Malcolm can walk through, but that formula dictates how much of our operating budget we have to hold in reserves for emergencies and various types of financial emergencies to physical emergencies. So the funding of above those reserves is available to be programmed for capital investments, and so that's what there is no cap, I guess, or requirement.
My question is, let's see, above the reserve, do you have to spend it down to the reserve, or what is an amount of padding you are allowed to keep above the reserve amount?
There's currently not a cap, but I think our goal is to put that, we're still in an emergency, and but I think our goal is to work that back down to policy by implementing projects that we believe we can get done and need to get done. So,
is there an amount, because we're still in extreme drought, that you're keeping it above reserve mentally, an amount that you're keeping it 5 million above, 10 million above, until we're out of that?
I'd say more of what's driving it now is what we can actually accomplish. But I think that's a great discussion, which is how much do we want to carry, because our reserves are very limited, and given the magnitude of this drought, I mean, we've already spent a lot. It wouldn't take much to get out of whack again. I mean, it's with a $50 million budget, $17 million is not a lot. Not a lot of coverage. So I think that's a good discussion. Right now, the limitation is just the ability for our resources to get out and spend some of these funds. Yeah.
Mr. Hagmark, if I may add, and Mr. Chair, Councilmember Sneddon, we fund a drought fund at approximately $3.5 million per year. So we do have some annual funds available for supplemental water purchases, additional staffing needs, and some of our advertising and for conservation messaging.
I had a question, Michael.
All right, no, I'll go. So I'm not sold, as you know, I'm not sold yet on the digital meters. So it seems to me, well, just in my personal perspective, that's a discussion still to be had on what the full cost of that would possibly be versus what the benefit is, and to assign what seems like a lot of money just to get to a point to start to think about it. $500,000 just to plan on it seems like a lot. I know you know more about this than I do. So I'm just I think I told you last week I wasn't sold on it, and it's going to go up, and council can decide how close they want to read this or not. But in terms of what else could be done with that money or other money there, is there nothing going on that could be addressed with increasing the capacity of the recycled center and finding new customers for that increased capacity? Laying pipe, finding customers. I mean, is that not a use that bubbles up for this particular time and place?
Commissioner Jordan, we certainly can bring that back, but there wasn't the cost benefit to that. I mean, the amount of, we've done a pretty exhaustive study of how many more customers could use recycled water and the cost of getting the pipelines there.
Million a mile.
And it just doesn't pencil out for the water that we'd save. If we had some big customers, there might be a bigger incentive to go after them, but that's not really there. And then I think we would definitely bring back an AMI discussion, because I am confident we can convince you it is a good expenditure of water fund money to help our customers to better understand their water usage and to really cut down on the, unfortunately, which we see a lot of wasted water because people turned on the hose, forgot to turn it off, or their irrigation had a leak and they just didn't know.
Okay.
And so I think there's a lot to be gained with that, but I think we owe you a presentation on that. It's been a long time since we've talked about AMI, and we can bring that back for
I'll volunteer to be a pilot location also. Okay.
Fantastic.
And then my other question on just time and place. Are we totally just stalled on the future of potable reuse and beginning to set money aside for what that will take or possibly look like? And when do we do that? If we have reserves and we're identifying places to use those reserves, when do we begin to say that we know we're going to get there in the future? Is it so far away that we can't begin to do that now?
I think it is still quite a ways out. I mean, the state is at least 7 years out from having regulations that we can work with. So I believe it's a long ways out. I think the best way that we're going to want to fund a project like that is likely going to be through an SRF loan.
Okay.
And so I think taking money right now and socking it away for that, I don't think that's a good use of our funding right now. I think we want to try and put it towards infrastructure that we need to maintain.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Megan.
Thank you. I've been on this commission for 7 years. The first year was Katrina had just spilled, and we went right into a very big drought after that. So part of me is a little bit gun shy, knowing that we potentially have 7 more years of a drought. So having reserves is a wonderful thing. So I guess my first question: does this leave us with $13.9 million over reserves, or about $7 million over reserves?
Chair Davis, Commissioner Burney, it would leave us at about $13.9 million above reserves. And in addition, when we actually receive the $10 million grant, it would increase that to approximately $23 million.
Great.
$24 million.
Okay, thank you. So a couple more questions. you're talking about savings from the desal plant. Are those savings or are those deferred payments? Because at some point we're going to have to pay those, right?
That's absolutely correct. It's a combination. One of them, as we had planned for the facility to operate continuously all year, it had intermittent operations in the first part of the year. So there was a savings roughly of about $2 million there. And then we had planned to make our first loan payment this year. As you're kind of indicating, we did not have to make that loan payment, but we will have to ultimately make it. So it's just programming it for this year. We have that one-time savings, but 20 years from now, we'll be making that final payment, which we will. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that makes sense. For AMI, I'm definitely a fan. I'm excited to see the pilot project. I know just from conversations with people that they don't really understand their water use. And I think that's the biggest thing, even if the savings are not astronomical, really getting people to understand how what they do every single day impacts their actual water use and what an HCF is, and, those types of things. I think there's just so much education around it. And when we do have these big droughts, I think it'll be hugely important. So I'm excited to see that pilot project going forward. What will the size of that pilot project be? Is it just going to be Michael Jordan's house, or do I get one
I think
too?
it should be your house. I think it should be your house too. That'll balance out the equation for me.
I can speak to that a little bit. And our target with that $500,000 in funds is around 100 endpoints. And Commissioner Jordan, to your comment about digital meters, we're also cautious of moving forward with a different type of meter, and we've studied the industry well. We're a member of the technology approval group, actually, where we partner with Metro Water, Denver Water, LADWP, a lot of other agencies out there to make sure that the decisions we make are prudent, and that once we connect to these technologies, that we're confident that the end goal will be met. So that $500,000 also includes some funds to work towards converting some of our larger meters to AMI compatible. Ultimately, the AMI component is a capital upgrade, and we're looking how that would integrate with our metering program. So it's something we're going to have to study carefully in order to make sure the integration happens well.
Thank you.
Aren't all our current meters that we're replacing are AMI compatible, right?
Correct. Correct. And that program is on, that replacement project's on target right now. So we're looking at integrating the rest of our meters into a timeline that would ultimately allow us to go full AMI later once we've studied the technology.
Almost done. And again, Commissioner Jordan kind of brought this up with the potable reuse, or maybe what we'll call One Water, and the conveyance pipeline obviously supports One Water. Is the water system infrastructure plan also going to support what One Water would look for us?
The infrastructure plan, we'll look at some of that. I don't want to get too far ahead of us on this, but we'll be looking at how producing water in the lower parts of our city will function. One of the challenges right now when we ever need to take Cater down is having enough storage in the system such that you can have it off for 2-3 days. And so obviously having that capacity to produce water in the bottom of the system, whether that's potable reuse or desal water, provides us a little more flexibility to take Cater offline and to actually do some maintenance to it at a much more reasonable pace. So.
Yeah, because if we're talking 30 years, if potable reuse is 7 years off, then hopefully this water infrastructure plan will include kind of the One Water. And I guess my last question, kind of, a lot of us have background on many of these things. A lot of them are pretty technical, but they're big things. These are important things that we've been putting off for a really long time in the community. So I'm actually very excited to see these things. I'm just wondering, how are we going to communicate the impact to the public? So what's kind of the public messaging around this financing plan, if there is one, or what's the process for making sure the public understands how important so many of these things are?
Well, I think it starts with this meeting and talking about those projects. I certainly plan on, as we start to develop the scopes detailed scopes of these and bring back contracts to move forward, we're going to have even more detailed discussions. This is just setting aside the funding so that we can have those discussions in the future. But yeah, I expect we'll have more. The Alameda Pipeline project, for example, is something that it has been in design, and we had it sitting on the shelf, and so it's something that we're dusting off, finish the design, and then we'll be back to talk to you about the construction of that.
You do an annual report in people's bills. Again, highlighting capital projects and going forward wouldn't be a bad idea.
Yeah, we hit it there. We try to hit it in our quarterly newsletter. We've tried different ones. We're open to suggestions on other avenues that we can communicate it as well.
Another question.
I'm just curious, how many water customers are signed up online and pay their bills online?
Dakota, do you know how many are signed up?
So I guess when we're talking favorably about the benefits of the AMI program, that might be something you want to look up. So in my business, we are trying really hard to transition customers to digital. We don't want to mail out 300 pages of an insurance policy. We'd rather email it to them. We want them to do stuff online. And I'm just telling you, my experience is there's a whole bunch of people anywhere that don't even get on the internet. Okay, so part of this is what you're really talking about. I consider myself conversant, but I have kids who will dance around me in this area. So really what you're talking about is an investment in the next generation, not me. And I will show interest because I'm more than involved in this stuff, but there are tons of people, neighbors of mine, that wouldn't pay a bill online, won't go online, probably maybe have an internet connection, but just don't live on it like the rest of us, don't have a smartphone. That's what worries me about the message of this AMI thing. And part of what would answer my concern would be, well, how many people are already taking advantage of their ability to set up an account online where I can look at my monthly water usage already on a monthly basis, not on a daily basis.
And it is a great point. I've got an example with Santa Maria that I can talk about, but one of the other advantages with AMI is we get notification of unusual water usage as well, and we can just kind of figure out what our engagement. We may give them a call. We already do a lot of hands-on stuff, but giving us that information where we may find that a particular neighborhood, it seems to be using more water than others. And so we may want to hone our message to that neighborhood rather than telling everyone they need to conserve. Maybe it's a particular neighborhood that could use more communication on it. I think trying to be more surgical. But to your point, you have a great point. The city of Santa Maria was an early implementer of AMI, and they really are glad they did it. But it was really interesting. They didn't even bother with a online interface at all. They basically said, we have a low-income community. There's very little access to the internet. They're not using it. So on their end, they have taken that personal approach where they'll see unusual water use over a 2-day, 3-day period, and they'll actually call the customer and say, hey, we've got some unusual data, wondering if you need any help or we come out. And so I think that kind of speaks to this hybrid that we have to kind of adapt. But they found that to be effective. Someday they're going to have an online presence, but they when they originally kind of were looking at their customers, they were going to go online and look. So I think trying to hit both sides of that.
Okay, I just have one comment, and actually there are two a comment and a question. I too am chafing at the bit to basically do something towards potable reuse and just not let that say the state's coming in 7 years, 10 years, and we have to wait for that. But I hear you in that regard. But I guess I've also recognized that we're going to need more land down there for whatever we do. Mm-hmm. And in my Neanderthal budgeting, what are we doing setting aside water funds today for future expansion of the plant land-wise? Because that's going to be something which we do run into. And the answer of we go out and get another loan, that just means added debt burden to the system, which ends up with increased rates. We know we're going to have to expand this plant. Right, we know we're going to have to make fund transfers, even if we take other city land. Right, what are we doing in terms of banking, land banking, or putting money away for that type of expansion in the future, be it potable use or otherwise?
That's a great question, and with the recent property, our former RDA property on Calle Cedar Chavez, we certainly were going after that property and planning to utilize reserves to pay for that if we had been successful. Unfortunately, we weren't. I think one of the challenges, in particular related to potable reuse, is we do have water fund property that is perfectly suited for this facility. Unfortunately, it has general fund operations on that property. And so the question lies in, is it the water...
Moving them is going to cost money.
Right. Is it the water fund's responsibility to find the general fund another home?
I see.
I think that's kind of an interesting crux to this discussion. But I think we have the property. It's suitable, and that was kind of the strategy with the Kaiser Cedar Chavez property, was to find something where we could get the general fund squatters
Like
off
I say, that was a comment. My question is, in the second to last paragraph says, the one-time surplus of reserves will support rate stability. Defined rate stability. With the annual rate increases that we're proposing to council, or what we're talking about is no further rate increases beyond that?
Mr. Chair, that's correct. That it will allow us to set rates that use reserves as opposed to setting rates that would balance us out, which would otherwise be higher.
Good. Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Okay, not hearing any. We do have a recommendation on the board. Is there a motion?
So I'll move the recommendation.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion is passed unanimously. Thank you for the presentation and the discussion. Takes us to item 6C. This is the overview of Sustainable Groundwater Management Act.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Dakota Corey, and I'm the water supply analyst for the city of Santa Barbara. And today I'm going to present an overview on the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which is commonly referred to as SGMA. In today's presentation, we'll do a quick overview of the city's groundwater resources, which kind of provides the context for how SGMA might affect the city. We'll look at a couple of approaches the city has available to it for groundwater management strategies. I'll also give a quick overview of the SGMA legislation, including requirements, and then we'll talk about some of the benefits and challenges of forming a groundwater sustainability agency for the city, and we'll talk about a potential timeline associated with that formation. So to start, we'll just look quickly at what the city's groundwater resources are. As you know, groundwater is a critical part of the city's water supply portfolio, especially during times of drought, when surface waters from the Santa Ynez River and the State Water Project may be not as available to the city as they are in wet years. Groundwater is a truly local supply. The city is the primary pumper in both of our groundwater basins, and we operate several production wells and treatment facilities within the basins. Per the city's long-term water supply plan, groundwater is conjunctively managed by the city, and what that means is that we store groundwater in the ground during wet years and save it for drought periods. During wet years, the basins are rested and they're allowed to replenish through infiltration. Additionally, we do have some wells that are capable of groundwater injection, which gives us the option of augmenting groundwater water supplies through water recycling and stormwater capture and reuse. This here is a map of our groundwater basins. You can see the red outline that highlights the city's boundaries, and then the black hash marked outlines are the outlines of the groundwater basins. And I first want to look at the combination here, I think you can see the pointer a little bit, of Storage Unit 1 and Storage Unit 3. Together, these storage units make up the Santa Barbara Basin. They are considered distinct groundwater storage, distinct basins, subbasins within the Santa Barbara Basin. We have several production wells in Storage Unit 1, and you can see that it underlies most of the downtown area of the city. And then to the southwest of that, we have Storage Unit 3. We have one production well in Storage Unit 3. The water quality there isn't fantastic, and so we use that as a non-potable backup supply to our recycled water system. In the northwest portion of the city, you can see that we have the Foothill groundwater basin. It underlies both city or parcels within the city boundaries and areas outside of the city limits, including Mission Canyon here, which we do serve water to, even though they're outside of city boundaries. And while it's not on the map, I do want to direct your attention to the east side of the city here. Over here is where the Montecito groundwater basin exists, and it's actually adjacent to the Santa Barbara basin down here, and then up towards the top it kind of comes close to our foothill basins. And that's going to be important as we continue on in the presentation talking about groundwater sustainability agencies, since they're moving forward with forming a groundwater sustainability agency. So, looking more closely at the Santa Barbara basin, which again is comprised of storage units 1 and 3, this is our storage unit 1 is, and it serves storage unit 1 is vulnerable to seawater intrusion because it's close to the Pacific Ocean. The city is the only known primary pumper in storage unit 1, and water is pumped from 4 different wells that's then treated at the Ortega groundwater treatment plant prior to entering the water distribution system. As was mentioned in the previous presentation, we hope to bring Alameda Well, which is also in storage unit 1, online to feeding to the groundwater treatment plant as well. The Foothill Basin, which was that basin that was in the northwestern portion of the city, exists both within city limits and outside of city limits. There's currently 3 main city production wells within the Foothill Basin, and those are chlorinated prior to the water being fed into the city's distribution system. There are some other known pumpers within the Foothill Basin. Those include La Cumbra Mutual Water Company, the Lincolnwood Neighborhood, San Vicente, and privately held wells primarily serving residences in the Mission Canyon area, which again is that area outside of city limits. So next we'll discuss briefly different approaches that the city has available to it to manage our groundwater resources outside of SGMA. Outside of SGMA, we have 2 different approaches. There's adjudication, and there's also regulations that are included in the municipal code and enforced by police powers. So adjudication is when you have multiple pumpers in a basin, and they ask the courts to better define water rights to pump water from that basin. Typically, there's a water master assigned during adjudication that makes sure that pumping conforms to the limits that were set by the courts. And one thing that's good about adjudication is it can take pumpers that aren't wanting to conform to pumping limits and bring them within a court order so that everybody is pumping in a way that protects the groundwater resources. Adjudication, though, takes decades to complete because it's a court process, and it doesn't allow for flexible or adaptive management of the groundwater resources because anytime you want to change the court order, you go back to court, and that takes a long time. So the city would prefer not to go down the path of adjudication. Another option that we have to manage our groundwater resources currently is developing rules regarding groundwater usage through our municipal code, and those are enforceable via our city police powers. So to look at that a little bit more closely, we currently develop rules and regulations regarding groundwater usage through our municipal code. For example, Chapter 14.32 of the municipal code addresses groundwater wells. These rules only apply within city boundaries, however, and so therefore they're not enforceable in areas within our basins that are located outside of city limits, such as those in the Foothill Basin. Recently, in response to the current drought conditions, the city amended its municipal code to prohibit the drilling of private wells that for parcels that were either served by the city water system or feasibly served by the city water system. In addition to regulations in our municipal code, the city has been studying and monitoring our groundwater basins for decades, often in partnership with the USGS. We currently have an agreement with USGS that includes 60 monitoring wells for water level and 40 wells for water quality. Of those 40 wells for water quality, there's 8 wells that we specifically look at chlorides to help us track seawater intrusion in storage unit 1. The city is also working with USGS to develop a detailed numeric groundwater model in order to estimate the sustainable yield of our basins and also to inform our pumping practices. In addition to the work that we've done with USGS in the basins, we're also a monitoring entity under the CASGEM program. CASGEM stands for the California Statewide Groundwater Elevation and Monitoring Program. We submit monthly groundwater levels to the Department of Water Resources, and those are used for overall state planning regarding the state's groundwater resources. In addition, we recently completed a feasibility study regarding artificial recharge of the groundwater basins with recycled water. And our newer groundwater wells have recharge capabilities, and we'd like to start a pilot study that allows us to explore doing artificial recharge in wet years or when consumer is spilling. We'd start with one well before expanding to additional wells, and we have done some injection in the past with some water quality concerns that resulted from that. But now we have newer wells and different operating procedures, so we think the pilot study could allow more success in the future. And that's why we'd like to try it out.
Just as a caveat to that, the injection is typically half the rate of extraction. So if we have a well that's producing 500 GPM, the fastest you can put water back into the ground is 250 GPM. So there are some significant limitations to how quickly you could really benefit. The best way to get water in the basin is through its natural means, typically our local creeks.
Injection also, just trying to remember another life, but injection also involves the water has to be down there a period of time, right, before you can pull it up for reuse?
Related to potable reuse, that's correct. For the
Okay.
indirect potable reuse, it needs to spend, and it depends on how much treatment you do. But
So as part of our study, I think they use DNA markers, right? So you put water in somewhere, and you either leave it down there a certain period of time, or you can actually put water in there, and if it travels horizontally over a period of time, and you're right. I'm
Right.
kind of on the right track here,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
And so I get what you're saying is the extraction is half, but do we have that capability for that type of horizontal transfer and period of time to where then we can pull it somewhere, we can put it in one place and pull it somewhere else?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Jordan, in the feasibility study, that was, I think, one of the challenges we would face. It identified potentially an additional roughly 20 new wells that we'd have to install to do indirect potable reuse. We don't currently have any place to locate those, any land or sites identified, and they would have to be located in places that allowed that travel time to occur, and also not be in locations that might be near sensitive habitat in case there's mounding issues. So we have, I think that particular issue of where we would put the wells is one of the largest challenges we would have with doing indirect potable reuse.
Thanks.
All right, so now let's get into the meat of SGMA a little bit, and it's actually just going to be an overview. I won't bog you down with legislative language. So on September 16th, 2014, Governor Jerry Brown signed a three-bill legislative package that was comprised of AB 1739, SB 1168, and SB 1319, comprehensively known as the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA. In general, SGMA requires governments and water agencies to halt overdraft and to bring their groundwater basins to balanced levels of pumping and recharge. Under SGMA, basins are expected to reach sustainability within 20 years from implementing their groundwater sustainability plan. And SGMA empowers local agencies to form GSAs, or groundwater sustainability agencies, and to implement GSPs, or groundwater sustainability plans, for crucial groundwater basins in California. And I did want to direct your attention to the quote at the bottom of the slide. One thing that's important about the intent of SGMA was to really keep the management of groundwater local, because it is a local resource. And so Governor Brown stated that a central feature of these bills is the recognition that groundwater management in California is best accomplished locally rather than a top-down approach from the state. So sustainable groundwater management is defined in SGMA as the management and use of groundwater in a manner that can be maintained during the planning and implementation horizon without causing undesirable results. So what are undesirable results? SGMA further goes on to define undesirable results as chronic lowering of groundwater levels, significant and unreasonable reduction of groundwater storage, significant and unreasonable seawater intrusion, significant and unreasonable degraded water quality, including the migration of contaminant plumes that impair water supply, significant and unreasonable land subsidence that substantially interferes with surface land uses, depletions of interconnected surface water that have significant and unreasonable adverse impacts on the beneficial uses of that surface water. I do want to note that land subsidence isn't an issue here locally, although it is a major issue in other places of the state, namely the Central Valley. And also wanted to note that DWR recently released a series of best management practices to address these undesirable results as agencies are moving forward to develop their groundwater sustainability plans. So then what are the requirements under SGMA? Prior to SGMA in 2009, the California Comprehensive Water Package required DWR to prioritize the California groundwater basins in order to help identify, evaluate, and determine the need for additional groundwater monitoring. When SGMA came along, that added further requirements for DWR to develop the initial groundwater basin priorities by January 31st, 2015. So using the CASGEM data that we contribute to, a final basin prioritization was released and under SGMA, and it initially designated 127 groundwater basins as either medium or high priority. These 127 basins represent approximately 96% of the groundwater usage in the state and also account for about 88% of the state's population. And on this slide, I listed the characteristics that CASGEM and DWR looked at to determine the ranking of each of the groundwater basins in the state. So you can see that there's things like population, there's how much water is pumped, if there is how much the community relies on groundwater as a primary source, et cetera. So under the requirements of SGMA, only basins that are designated as either medium or high priority have required actions. And for those basins, they first must form a groundwater sustainability agency, and that was actually required by June 30th, 2017, so most of those have been formed. And now those groundwater sustainability agencies are working on groundwater sustainability plans. And depending on the prioritization, those plans must be completed either by 2022 or for basins that are critically overdrafted, they have to complete their plans by 2020. Under SGMA, these basins should reach sustainability within 20 years of implementing their plans. So that means for most of the high and medium priority basins, they should be reaching sustainability in 2042, and the critically overdrafted basins should be reaching sustainability in 2040. Yeah.
Are any of our basins in the medium or high priority?
That's my next
designation?
sentence. Good question. So basins designated as low or very low priority, including those underlying the city, so both of our basins, have an option to implement a groundwater sustainability agency and groundwater sustainability plan, but at a timeline of the agency she's choosing, and also we don't have to implement it at all. So to further explain, the city's two groundwater basins, the Foothill Basin and the Santa Barbara Basin, each had pumpage less than 2,000 acre-feet per year in the CASGEM data set that was used to do the prioritization, which was a 2010 data set. And there was also no significant impacts or issues documented within our basins. So we were automatically ranked as very low priority groundwater basins. It should be noted that DWR has a legislative requirement to update its basin prioritization, and that would be based on updated CASGEM data as well as basin boundary modifications. So agencies have been going through and using geological studies and USGS reports to better define their groundwater basins under SGMA, and now with those new basin boundaries, that could affect their prioritization. So we're currently waiting results of that reprioritization. It was actually due almost a year ago now, and we're still waiting for that from GWR. If the city's basins are reprioritized to either medium or high, we'd have 2 years from the date of that reprioritization to form a GSA, and then 5 years from the date of that reprioritization to develop a groundwater sustainability plan. So what would be the benefits and challenges of forming a GSA for the city specifically? There's definitely benefits associated with the SGMA legislative package. GSA formation is consistent with the city's water supply planning policies, including the 2011 long-term water supply plan, which recommended that the city develop a groundwater management plan. GSA formation establishes the regulatory and financial framework for long-term management of the city's groundwater resources. It also establishes the basis for intergovernmental cooperation between neighboring agencies for activities that impact the groundwater basins but may not be located within the city's boundaries. Finally, GSA formation allows for cost sharing of groundwater management activities among all pumpers within the basin. There's also some challenges and risks associated with GSA formation specific to the city. First, SGMA's a relatively new legislative package, and those agencies that are required to form GSAs and develop GSPs are working with DWR right now to kind of sort out the implementation issues. There's still new data being developed by the state currently, and so there's probably value for the city to wait a little bit and learn from other agencies' experiences. At the city staff level, the current drought requires staff to focus on critical needs. GSA formation and the development of a GSP would require significant staff time to complete a number of activities, including extensive outreach to stakeholders, development of a technical groundwater sustainability plan, development and implementation of the management programs defined within that plan, the submission of annual reports to DWR, and periodic evaluation of the groundwater sustainability plan and any changing conditions. Despite these challenges, staff does feel that the regulatory framework associated with the GSA formation would be beneficial as the city continues to manage its groundwater resources. So what could a potential timeline look like? Before we jump into a specific timeline related to the city, I wanted to bring up Montecito Water District, our neighbors to the east. They manage the adjacent Montecito groundwater basin. And as I mentioned, when we looked at the map, it's actually congruent to the Santa Barbara basin that we manage. And they are also designated as a very low priority basin at this time. But Montecito Water District is a water agency, so unlike us as a city, they have even more limited powers on what they can do to manage the basin. And I included this map in the slide, and you can see over here on the far right-hand side, there's this area of interest. And if you look at where the box is, it's right over the top of the main like commercial area, residential area of Montecito. And when you blow that up, you can see that there's been hundreds of private well applications in Montecito's service area in the past several years. And so forming a GSA would allow them additional management capabilities within their groundwater basin.
They have about 1,000 wells in their service area, just to give you an idea. They're all relatively small wells, a couple gallons a minute, but getting a handle on those has been huge. The district has, 2 or 3 wells that they use, and of course, with the cost of water and everything going up, everyone's trying to find water for their irrigation, and so I think Montecito's trying to bring everybody together and be thinking more holistically about the groundwater management.
Would they need us to form a GSA?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Snedden, we're working on an MOU because we have certain areas of their groundwater basin that overlie city or within the city limits, and so we intend on partnering with them on that because we do see the benefit to them for managing their groundwater basins. But there are areas within the city that it's a small portions there's an overlap area. So that's why we're working on an MOU is for those small overlap areas.
And that transitions really nicely to our next slide, which is that staff is currently working with Montecito Water District as they work to form their groundwater sustainability agency. We're currently reviewing an MOU that would work for both us as a city and the Montecito Water District as they move forward in forming their GSA. We expect to bring that back to Water Commission for review sometime this year, probably not in the too far out future. Beyond working with Montecito, the city plans to wait a little while in order to develop, in order to benefit from lessons learned by other agencies, both locally and statewide, that are currently going through GSA formation and the development of their groundwater sustainability plans. Currently, we're tentatively planning to initiate GSA formation for our two basins, the Santa Barbara and Foothill basins, in 2021, unless the new state rankings come out and our basin priority is changed, and that would require earlier implementation. So that concludes my presentation, unless there's any questions.
Good. Thank you very much for the presentation. Other questions? Kristen?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Sure. Michael?
Mr. Chair. So the advantages you showed over forming a GSA, those would really only be advantages if we had either an MOU or another GSA on the areas that are adjacent and overlapping to our ground basins, right? There'd be no advantage to be the only one on that map with a GSA. Is that correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Jordan, we would need the other areas outside of the city to participate in this GSA formation. They would be part of the GSA and members of the GSA. So, yes, so that's one of the key benefits for us doing this is the more holistic management of the entire basin itself rather than just those portions within city limits that we have authority over right now.
So if you don't have a water district laying over one of those basins, like in the case of the county on the other fringes, does it default to the county to do so?
Correct.
And where are they on the Foothill one or wherever else in the city it's county land that might have wells in our basins, in the shared basins?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Jordan, they are involved in quite a few different GSAs throughout the county right now. They have, if there's another local water agency that wants to take the lead on the GSA formation, they have been deferring to that lead agency. If nobody steps up and wants to do one, then it would default to the county if a GSA formation was required.
Okay. And then that map you showed for Montecito Water District, just anecdotally, I've been told in the county, which would be Montecito Water District 2, that basically there's a period that you showed 1,000 of them, whatever, that there was a period of time several years ago where basically people were just putting wells down and they didn't need permission. True? False?
I think they are supposed to get it permitted through the county.
So
County has a permitting
at that time
process.
it was probably an over the counter, just turn in your piece of paper, go drill your well. Obviously, eventually there's consequences to that, and so the GSA process or MOU would help address that. But as of right now, in that particular situation adjacent to us, is it still just as easy as turn a piece of paper in, go drill your well?
The county's process, they review the well applications that come through, but the county is the agency that's overseeing that process and approving those permits.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Jordan, that's correct. There is nobody saying no. Okay. And the Montecito Water District was asking during the height, probably the 2014, 2015, asking the county board to take action to limit well drilling, at least temporarily, and unfortunately the county wanted to implement something that would be countywide, and of course that's not something that's even palatable North County, so it died there. I do want to remind the Commission that we have a moratorium on drilling wells within the city limits, particularly if any property is adjacent to city service. So we have, but that's within the city limits. We go into Mission Canyon, you go into kind of the Goleta area, and that doesn't limit you from drilling into the Foothill Basin.
So I'll just sneak in my comment. I would wholeheartedly encourage us to move forward on this, of course, only if we can get our adjacent neighbors to participate. I was on the Regional Water Board when this was passed by the governor, and most of our focus on this region was the Santa Maria Basin, which is an adjudicated area, but it's got a ton of problems. And they're obviously by that timeline they've had to get their first adoption, and they're working on their GSA plan right now. And there's we are lucky that we don't really have the heartbreaking stories that exist across the rest of the state, whether it's just from an infrastructure standpoint of stuff sinking or poor communities that just have no access to water anymore because people have either overpumped or polluted the water flume, or traditionally they just pull water out of the ground and drink it. And we're lucky that we're in a situation where we have some relative affluence and we're able to treat our water, manage our water. But certainly one would be crazy not to, I would be crazy not to think that the future of our waters is going to really rely on our groundwater as a source, and to manage that responsibly with the adjacent stakeholders in a structured manner is going to be crucial to our success of that, proactively rather than trying to react to all the problems that are elsewhere in the state. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Kristen?
This isn't a later item, but there's the mention that our groundwater levels are at near historic lows on item 6E. So I'm interested in what is our plan, and maybe that comes up later, but as we're talking about that, what is our plan to have those recharged and at a sustainable level? And then 2 questions also about, so do we not have subsidence because it's sandstone underneath? We don't have the compression? So we can get to critically low without having subsidence, so we wouldn't see a surface expression even though it was happening, right? So,
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Sneddon, that's correct. It is because of the geology of our basins that we don't have the compaction issues that are in other parts of the state. Yeah. As for our plan to recharge the basins, our policy has always been to conjunctively manage the basins. We don't normally use our groundwater supplies extensively when we have normal to wet conditions and supplies from Kachuma and Gibraltar. We would rest our basins and allow the storage to build so that it's there for times of emergency. We're currently in an emergency, and we're now in the 7th year of drought, and so our groundwater basins are low. They're not as low as we've seen historically, but they are approaching low levels, and we've accounted for that in our supply planning. So we have an estimated yield that we think we could take out of storage, and once that yield is gone, we assume it's not there in our supply outlook for the next few years. And then after the drought, it's just a matter of resting our wells, allowing the natural recharge to occur over a period of time. And we also have this pilot study that we'll be working on to try and do some artificial recharge as well.
Because that is assuming that there is an after the drought.
Assuming there's an after the drought, correct.
A big assumption.
And then I had one more question about what do we assume? Do we assume the connectivity throughout the basin is throughout the basin, or what is the radius from a well that they could be pulling in adjacent areas? So is it if you're in the basin, you could be drawing from anywhere in the basin, or is it locally what the radius might be or a range on that?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Sneddon, there is a what they call a cone of depression, where there's a radius that the water level impacts are deeper right at the well, and then they sort of come up. So we've been measuring water levels at that higher point as well as right at the well. So we have data for both right at the well and other parts of the basin.
So I guess my question is, in the overlaps where Montecito overlaps with our basins, what is the reach of that cone of depression to be drawing water out of the basin?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Sneddon, the way that the water flows is out towards the ocean normally, and because of where Montecito is pumping from the basin, it's intercepting what would go out to the ocean. It's not necessarily pulling from our area, so we don't expect that it's affecting the location of our wells. Our wells are pretty far away from the Montecito Basin. We're not right up against it with our wells. So I think we haven't suspected any impacts of the Montecito pumping on our basin.
Okay. Michael?
I just had a question about the GSAs. Are we proposing we're going to form two separate ones for our different basins, or just one for the entire region?
For the city's GSA,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, or Councilmember, Commissioner Kilborn. I'm sorry, Commissioner Kilborn. We would form a GSA for each basin,
Okay.
and then so for Storage Unit 1, the city's the only real known pumper, but Foothill Basin would have to have the other entities that are
Yeah.
part of that GSA.
That was kind of my
formation.
reason for the question. I think we're covered pretty well by the city code for Storage Unit 1, but the Foothill Basin, obviously, we have a lot more competing interests, so it makes more sense to definitely move forward with trying to put that together for that basin.
Great. Hey, I just want to this is off the wall question. Back in the late 19th, early 20th century, Veronica Springs was like the Fiji water of the day. What happened to that storage basin that it can't be used potably today?
Do you have the history on that?
I don't know that it was ever that great based on what I understood is there was the Hidden Valley development that was built, and they built their own well.
The Veronica Springs actually was a resort, and they actually shipped water from the Veronica Springs nationally, right? It was healthy water, quote unquote, right? So I'm assuming everybody in the country was drinking bad water.
Well, maybe there is a spring that comes out of the Hope Ranch area versus what we're pumping out, which is
That really was my question.
Yeah.
That's where the term Veronica Springs come from. You look at the old pictures of that. It was a major resort, national resort in that regard. Anyway, good. Thank you very much for the presentation. And we will keep on top of this information. It's now 11, so let's talk about agenda management. We're going to keep going, I'm assuming, for a few minutes. What's the commission's availability? Keep going? Okay, I have to leave about 11:20. Okay, Joshua, water.
Oh, I'm sorry.
all right.
I'm actually getting up to.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, Council Liaison, this topic I think started in February actually when we were talking about wastewater budget and in particular wastewater long-range planning, and we got into this discussion about how the term wastewater treatment plant really didn't reflect what that facility did. And so the commission had directed staff to come back and continue the discussion about how we might go about changing that. And so as a kind of an introduction to it, I wanted to talk a little bit about One Water. And One Water is a concept, I believe it started with the Water Alliance. It's kind of a national organization trying to change the perception of how we look at water. And this One Water concept is for lack of better words, a holistic systems thinking approach to water. It's not looking at just surface water. It's looking at the surface water, its environmental impacts, the energy needed to get that surface water to your community, treat that water, and then what that water looks like, gray, black water when it's done, and how that again interacts, energy involved before it goes back into the environment again. And so it's this large-scale approach, and why I wanted to introduce it is I think it's, as we move through it, and we notice it in our organization, we have the Sustainability Committee, we have the Creeks Committee, we have the Water Commission, we have all these various divisions, departments, and committees that are working on this, what I would consider under the umbrella of One Water. And starting this discussion, because I do think this is a long-range kind of dialogue, but starting to introduce the terminology that we are approaching things in a holistic approach. We are concerned about the energy used, needed for desal and trying to figure out how we go about mitigating that impact. And so going through the process of really thinking holistically, and I think that this commission on various issues has embraced that, and so does this council. And so wanting to introduce the One Water, because I believe that's the larger umbrella in which moving down a path to rename the El Estero wastewater treatment really fits. And I think, it's a larger discussion, and one that I'm not, some agencies, there's San Diego or One Water San Diego, One Water LA. So they have these larger programs that they're working on. And I see this kind of something that we're going to start slowly integrating, maybe talking about as we move through in various projects, but it kind of being an underlining tone to what we're doing, because I think it's already present, but it lacks a name. It lacks a formal description. And I believe that's kind of necessary as we embark on renaming El Estero. And I wanted to kind of chime in on kind of next steps with the El Estero discussion and where we're headed, or any thoughts you guys have on this One Water. I know I just sent you some information last night on it. There's a lot out there. I recently was at the water reuse conference, and that's a big topic there, is trying to approaching these things in silos. And unfortunately, to some extent, that's always going to exist. I mean, you got DWR doing one thing, you got the Army Corps, you got Fish and Wildlife, you got the Coastal CCC, Coastal Commission. You just have all these different silos that you're dealing with. So I don't know how much we'll be able to break down all of those governmental barriers, but as we can start to work in that way, and I think we already are. And I think formally, I'm just looking to kind of give it a name and talk about it. One of the other confusions that often comes up when we talk and we look out there at what other agencies are doing with this is when we talk about potable reuse, the terminology that's kind of being embraced is pure water. That is the terminology that a lot of agencies are adopting when they talk about potable reuse. So if you go down, it's San Diego Pure Water, Monterey Pure Water. I think there's a Central Coast Pure Water that's programmed, and so they're kind of standardizing on some language, because potable reuse is kind of it doesn't really help the public to understand. So, and I think going back to Lisa, maybe talking about the resource recovery element of it.
Yes. We are going to be preparing outreach materials and working our way towards the renaming of El Estero. And as I went through the process, One Water has been something I've been talking to Joshua about for a while. It's been something I've been excited about, because I feel like we really fit into that well with everything that we're doing. We're taking waste streams and we're converting them to value streams, and you see that in everything that we're doing at El Estero. And so I really feel like we need to kind of have a larger vision, and so I think it's perfect timing for us to be talking about the One Water concept. In the future, I'm writing an RFP for public outreach, and we'll be going down that road of naming the wastewater treatment plant as we talked about earlier. And I need a framework to work within. It's going to be exciting, but I need consultant support to be able to do that. So I'll be hopefully bringing that to you in the next month or two, a selection and how we start moving forward with not only the renaming, but the larger concept as well.
So any thoughts, ideas? Yeah.
Mike?
I'm in. So, we have a problem. We have a really small committee. So dragging several of us, two of us together already, that's it. But I'd be in. I think one of the answers to that, if there's any interest in this group, is maybe to set up some meetings as work sessions that are noticed, where it's not this semi-formal kind of thing, but we can just sit around the table and and stick stuff on the wall and decide what to leave up there, what to take down. I really like what you wrote. Okay, you didn't hand it out today, but I'm looking at it on my iPad, so I like that as a starting point. What really resonated to me actually was the last bullet, which is relying on partnerships and inclusions, et cetera. And I know Hillary walked in the room, so I'm sure she's got an opinion on that. I think when we last talked about that, I said I think it's important to encourage groups like Heal the Ocean, Channel Keeper, Urban Creeks Council in this process as a partner, not a contributor for 2 minutes at public comment, so as a partner. And then I also think you talked about, you just mentioned it just now, the boxes or whatever, or the little kingdoms or whatever. You said something, but that's just, so.
Silos.
All right, silos, thank you. That sounds a little better. Yeah, sure. But I think it's also important to work on those and put them at the table early too. And I'll just tell you how I started out my day. That was driving down Cabrillo from the Mesa and turning left at Garden and watching a contractor, obviously per Parks, place on their hands and knees at the entrance of Chase Palm Park, putting new sod in. So it just kind of took me back, you know. It's sod was the best choice for what reason versus something that didn't need to be watered versus decomposed granite. I don't know, but just kind of slapped me in the face as I turned the corner. So I think parks, creeks. Also, I think you may have had this conversation last week about the total cost of water related to hot water heaters. Was that at
That's
our
right.
meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so power and the burden cost of the water we use, not just the water we use, but the burdening that goes into that is the total cost of water too. I think just, you know, it's just time and money, just expanding the scope of this one water. But I think it's important to kind of eventually be interested in getting that message across with all the different silos also, that it's not just your silo of water and what it costs to clean it and then travel it and then get rid of it, but there's other silos involved in how much water I can use, how much I pay for my water, is it the best use of my water, what's going down on the ground that needs water, that kind of thing. So, and so if you're looking for people to help, I volunteer. I'm in. So.
And I do appreciate that, and I'd say one of the biggest challenges with this has been certainly not the passion or the support, but just the resources to do it. And again, you guys hear this all the time, but a drought emergency does have us spread really thin, and we do have a lot of work that we've been deferring on certain things that we're trying to also catch up on. And so that's why I bring this up as I want us to start heading down this path. I'm trying to make sure that I have adequate resources that we can give it some time. But, even internally, like I have 150 people that I want to get on board with this. I want them to embrace this. I want them to make sure that they own this as well, because I think that's equally important when we're moving forward. And so the various layers of stakeholders, when we talk about the community, I'm also my people, I want them to also feel that they're part of this process as well and have some input.
Chris?
I love this and support it so much, and I think I'm applauding you. I know it's uncomfortable to say the words holistic and that we're moving forward with this as one water, and I think the time isn't in the future, it's now. I think we're there right now, and I think all of these ideas are great to getting everyone on board and marketing and having work sessions, but I think right now we just start using the term one water when we're talking about water. We all do that. Using the term one water when you're giving staff reports, you're talking about the concept of one water. It's just a concept that we just start using now. We can work on the labeling of it and what we're renaming things more carefully, but I think that's something that we can do right away. And I do think, if we're talking about having 13 million or possibly 23 million above our reserves, that right here, this might be a good use for having a consultant, marketing, an outside person to help with this component of public outreach, getting people on board and coordinating with Heal the Ocean and different organizations to have that, bringing everybody with us together. But I think right now we're one water, and we just go with that. And I thank you for bringing this forward.
A really, really good comment and suggestion. I'm wondering, going back to Michael volunteering, you got 5 people here, probably 6 when you add a new commissioner, all going to be really supportive. Maybe this is one of those areas, again, that you do form an ad hoc. You talked about forming ad hocs. This would be one where, with the ad hoc, you don't have notice meetings. You can have these kind of work sessions or collaborative sessions with community groups. So maybe bring that back on an agenda for setting up formally an ad hoc on this item.
I like it.
Okay. Megan?
What everybody else said. Thank you, guys. Let's do this.
Good comment. Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Takes us to the State Street drought update. Kelly, you have 30 seconds. Just kidding. Thank you, Hillary. I didn't ask if you wanted to say anything.
No, I'm using the speaker clip for writing paper.
There you go.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We'll be involved.
Can you see? I can't see. I'm like,
Which one it is? Is it this last one? That's groundwater. Water main.
hit that little box.
I don't see it on here.
Okay.
I don't see it up there.
Here, it's in this folder.
See the folder for the drought update shortcut.
Oh.
You have to go to the shortcut right above there. Yeah. Put it on the desktop, she was saying, but that's okay.
Not a good listener. Okay.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm going to keep this very brief this morning. So we'll walk through our drought status, demand status, water supply strategy, water supply status, and water conservation program. Our rainfall for the year has been about 50% of normal. So even though we did have a few storms come through, it is overall a dry year for us. And no changes in our area regarding the federal drought monitor. We are categorized as a severe drought in our area, although the city has been in a drought emergency since 2014 and have had the highest level of stage 3 drought since then. Demand status, we have 44% savings for the month of March. And our 12-month running average is about 37%. Water sales came in a little high in March from what we were projecting. The purpose of this chart is to make sure that we're not dropping below what our projected revenue was. So in terms of any shortfalls in revenue, we are not seeing any issues there. Supply strategy, this chart is the same as last month. We are working on updating this chart, and we'll be bringing that to you in May to discuss the outlook given all of the storms that we had this year and also projecting out an additional year. Water supply status, Gibraltar is at 100% of capacity, and it started spilling. I apologize, the date isn't shown on there, but it was on March 29th in the morning, and it's still spilling, although our dam caretaker we communicate with frequently, and we think that it will stop spilling fairly soon, so late April. I'm not sure the exact date. We've had quite a few projects going on up at the dam. Just to give you a sense of some of the work that's going on, we have been replacing our intake diversion valves, and also for the pipe between our diversion point, and there's a pipe that brings water from that diversion facility over to Mission Tunnel. We did complete a video inspection and cleaning of that pipeline. Kachuma is at about 40% of capacity, and the city's current allocation is 40%. Our available supply is around 7,100 acre feet out of that 77,000 storage. And much of our water is a combination of the current year allocation plus our carryover from last year. If conditions remain dry, the emergency pumping facility will be needed. COME is estimating that would be needed. It would need to be operational by summer of 2019. And this summer, COME will be evaluating various installation options. They've been looking at compartmentalizing it between the pilings, the pipe, and the barge itself, and seeing if we can have different timing of installations of those components. Of course, it does affect costs if we do that. So the city has planned for reinstallation costs of $950,000 in our budget for fiscal year 19, and that would cover the costs if we need to put the facility in and it remains dry through next year. If we put the facility in and then it rains next year and we have to take it out, we may need to do a budget assessment depending on the cost of removal. This is the storage chart for Kachuma. So our current levels, let's see, the black is the current drought and the green is the previous 1986 to 93 period. So we're right where we were kind of at the beginning of our extreme drought condition a few years ago. No change in status on imported water. We continue to maximize our deliveries up to capacity. We have about 1,400 acre feet stored in Kachuma, about 1,100 acre feet in San Luis, and we're working to have some water returned from Palmdale that we put into storage in prior years when San Luis was spilling. Our allocation is currently 20%, although I have heard rumors that DWR will be increasing the allocation. That announcement will probably come out in the next couple of weeks. I don't know how much. I don't expect it to go over 50%, but I could be wrong. It's hard to tell sometimes because we had full reservoirs last year and didn't get a full allocation. So supplemental purchases, we continue to pursue the 1,500 acre feet of purchases, and we've actually identified reached an agreement really with Mojave Water District. That's a $320 per acre foot purchase cost, so about $500,000 to purchase the 1,500. It is an exchange, so for every 4 units of water they give us, we have to return 1, and that's over a 10-year period. And when we return the water, we would have to pay the delivery costs, which are about $250 an acre foot or less. So total cost for the purchase, accounting for that return cost, would be about $600,000. And that is really just getting us through the spring of 2019 to keep the pipe full. We'd have to reassess conditions again next year to see if we need to purchase additional water if the drought continues. Okay, groundwater basins, no change in status. Our wells are currently offline and the basins are resting, but we are, as part of our overall water supply assessment, we're looking at when we might need to turn those wells back online, and they are being exercised regularly in case we do need to turn them on. And do you want to handle this slide? Okay.
So, the desal plant continues to operate at full production. We still have not gotten a date out of them. little frustrated by that one, but we are meeting with them on a regular basis. I just can't get them to give me a date for when we can be able to do it. And that's the joys of a partnership. And then I did want to let the commission know that we do have an item going to council on May 1st to restart negotiations with Montecito. They took action on March 20th, basically a year late. Last year they put things on hold to explore other options, and they basically picked up the paperwork from a year ago and decided they wanted to continue moving forward. That is roughly a $300,000 financial commitment on their part, in addition to the roughly $200,000 that they'd already committed to keep negotiating. Part of the negotiations and where we ended was to finish this water supply agreement. We needed to have costs for the conveyance to make sure that we could actually get them the water. So that majority of that $300,000 is to fund a contract with Corolla, which is part of the council discussion on May 1st, which is to basically restart that work. So I anticipate, I know the design work is going to take probably the next 6 to 8 months, and I'm assuming negotiations will take the better part of that as well. And our new City Attorney Dan Hinsky will be working to help us in his experience with the San Diego Water Authority and their work on the Carlsbad facility. Sure will be helpful to have on the team. So.
Members of the Commission, my name's Madeline Wood, and I'm the Water Conservation Supervisor. And I have a quick plug today for the public voting of our WaterWise High School Video Contest. This is a contest that we do annually within the county. This is its 19th year. We have videos submitted from 9 different schools across the county, and the first, second, third, and honorable mention awards are chosen by the local water providers, but we also have public voting for what we call the People's Choice Award. That takes place on Facebook. All of the videos are posted on Facebook, and you can watch each video and then like the ones that you want, or you can like all of them. And that is open now. It's been open for a couple weeks, and it ends tomorrow at 5 p.m. So I encourage you to go to the WaterWise High School Video Contest Facebook page and vote for your favorite videos. Thank you.
And that concludes the presentation. Of take any questions.
Great. Okay, any questions? Okay, thank you very much. Joshua?
All right.
There's one more, the CCWA comb.
Do you have anything significant on that?
Just the meeting with reclamation, but we could skip it.
We can skip the CCWA update. That's fine. And the item I just wanted to mention as part of the manager's report is the Gibraltar tour for Friday, June 8th. Hopefully that works for everyone, and I will start working on noticing that meeting as a water commission meeting and arranging the transportation for that. So I'll work on that. And then also on May 8th, we'll be taking the collection system annual report, which is a consent decree requirement. We'll be taking that to council, just a heads up on that. Okay, thank you.
Could we still have the CCRB, CCWA report? And yeah.
On the Gibraltar thing, you might just check to see if you have a quorum, because if you don't have a quorum, you could do it without noticing and all of that. So
Okay.
Just take a head count. So
Are you in for that?
I'm not.
You're not. Okay. You're in, yes. Yes. Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so my name's Kelly Dyer, Water Supply Manager. I'll give a quick update on the CCRB COMB CCWA activities. So for COMB, the last board meeting was on Monday, March 26th, and some of the highlights for COMB activities, I think, are just the continued evaluation of the lake level projections. I covered that in the drought update, but there will be some decisions that need to be made this summer regarding the installation of the barge, which would need to be operational by the summer of 2019. We also COMB has been investigating some of the overruns in the budget from reclamation. You may recall that we had there were deficits in the budget for fiscal years 15 through 17. So staff did meet with representatives from reclamation on Friday, April 13th, to discuss those charges and what they were for. We requested some additional information from them at that meeting to better clarify what was actually spent versus what was budgeted. But when asked generally about the process of how they went so far over budget, the response that we got was that they have the authority to go over their budget by a certain amount, say 5%, to respond to unanticipated expenses or emergencies. At the time, we had the Hilton Creek watering system that was breaking down. We also had that valve that was stuck in the open position. So there were some emergencies that they had to address, and so they can go over their budget by, say, 5% without having to go back to Washington, D.C. for congressional authorization. And when they do that, they pull money from other projects, either trying to stay within their region, and sometimes they'd have to go outside of their region to pull money where they can find the funds to pay for these emergency projects. However, when they do that, there's a 2-year lag. So because they had these expenses back in 2015, 2 years later is when we start to see them in our water rates. And so they're finally catching up and truing up on the water rates charged to our project for expenses that went toward our project but were funded by other projects outside of the Kachuma project. So that's where we're at, and they have said that they will be looking to extend the payment over the remainder of our contract, so that it will be a 3-year period when we can pay back some of these expenses, and I believe that's how COMB is budgeting for the expenses, but they're still preparing their budget documents for approval this year as well. The next board meeting will be Monday, April 23rd. For CCRB, since our last Water Commission meeting, the CCR board has met 4 times on March 16th, March 29th, April 5th, and April 11th. Most of the items on the meetings were in closed session with no reportable action. But some of the highlights from the public discussions were that the contract with ICF for fisheries support work was amended with an increased budget, as well as a contract with Woodard and Kern for hydrologic work. CCRB is our representative in supporting the Bureau of Reclamation on their biological opinion processes and water rights order processes. So providing information and supporting that process. So CCRB adopted its proposed FY19 budget, which will need to be ratified by our City Council. So we will be bringing that to Water Commission in May to review the budget items for CCRB. And for CCWA, unfortunately, the last board meeting was on March 22nd, and I was not able to attend that meeting. So I'll have to give an update next month on the CCWA activities. Okay.
Okay.
That concludes our discussion.
That it?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll adjourn.
Thanks.
Thanks.
I added mulch to my trees and plants.
I put in a laundry to landscape gray water system to irrigate my fruit trees.
I removed my lawn and planted water-wise native plants and installed drip irrigation.
I stopped watering my lawn.
Do your part by saving water in your garden. Get a free water checkup from your water provider. Keep saving water, Santa Barbara County.